Welcome to this episode of Cheerful to Stormy, the everyday podcast with Ollie Schmidt. Today we are talking about drugs and addiction. Joining me is Mandy Simon. Mandy has a degree in psychology and works at the Familienservice in Berlin as a counselor. She wrote her thesis on cannabis prevention and has many years of experience working with people suffering from addiction, including at a detox station. With her expertise, we hope to gain insightful perspectives on this critical issue. We are discussing substance addictions, especially cannabis and alcohol, and their long-term effects. We delve into what addiction really is. Why do people use drugs? Why do professionals refer to addiction as dependency? We also take a little detour to Switzerland to see some positive drug-related projects and progressive rehabilitation programs there. And we take a little trip into the support system for addiction in Germany, exploring its various dimensions and effectiveness. Additionally, we address the question of whether it's okay to smoke weed at work. Enjoy the interview, which provides valuable insights. Obvious and relevant is the cannabis law. I just looked it up, and it is actually called simply the Cannabis Law, which came into effect on April 1st, 2024. This law has sparked a lot of discussions and debates across different sectors. It is now legal to grow and consume cannabis for personal use. We won't be giving any instructions on how it works, what you can do and what you can't do, although we'll probably touch on the do's and don'ts later. There are so many addictions, dear Mandy, that it can be overwhelming to comprehend. At the beginning, I'd like to give an overview of the types of addictions, the different groups of addictions like behavioral, substance, and process addictions. Then we'll see which of these addictions we'll be discussing today, since we can't talk about all of them in one session.
So primarily today, we're talking about substance-related addictions, such as alcohol, medication, or nicotine use issues. Then, of course, there are also behavior-related addictions, which include eating disorders, media addiction, and gambling addiction.
Of course, at PME Family Services, we also deal with all these various addictions in the context of counseling. But today, we have made a conscious decision to talk specifically about substance-related addictions. And it certainly makes sense to take a close look at that. From your experience, since you have a lot of experience with the topic, have worked in this field and even wrote your thesis on it, does the typical drug user really exist in society?
There isn't really a typical drug user in that form. There are categories like experimenters, those at risk of addiction, psychologically dependent, and those who endanger themselves mentally or physically. But all these categories are not very helpful in practice due to their overlap. We also talk about occasional users and people who can integrate consumption into their lifestyle and adapt it to their life concept. Additionally, there's the category of recreational users who partake in drug use only during specific social events or weekends. And of course, there are those we call addicts or heavy users, but the typical drug user doesn't really exist in this way. Everyone's relationship with substances is unique and varies greatly from person to person.
We'll also get back to what exactly enjoyment, misuse, and dependency are. But right now, I would like to change gears for a moment. As anyone who listens to this podcast closely knows, we've also discussed ADHD. Additionally, we've covered related topics such as mental health and anxiety, and there's a connection between ADHD and drug use. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, of course, especially in relation to ADHD. There is a special focus because the symptoms that people with ADHD experience are often such that when they use drugs, it appears as if they could treat their ADHD symptoms with them. It's almost like instead of taking medication that has been proven through rigorous scientific studies and clinical trials, some people resort to using illegal or unprescribed drugs. This obviously carries a certain risk because a false effectiveness is being portrayed, as the symptoms might initially decrease. However, the likelihood of developing an addiction to the drug being used also increases significantly, leading to more serious health issues down the line. And not every person knows that what they are feeling are ADHD symptoms and may use drugs to feel less abnormal. It's crucial to really examine what is going on. Why do you feel this way? Why can't you concentrate well, and so on? It requires an external diagnosis. You need to have the courage to see a specialist to get checked out instead of just deciding to use something to feel less abnormal compared to your environment.
That means using drugs can actually prolong the suffering in the end, because although you suppress the symptoms, you don't address the root cause.
Exactly, you summed it up really well. So basically, the symptoms are almost covered up.
Let's broaden the topic a bit more and look at what motivations there generally are. So apart from ADHD, what are some of the general motivations for people consuming drugs?
Well, people have been consuming things that alter consciousness in some form since the Stone Age, I would say. So it's not something you can say is a modern thing. People have been consuming since they could think to perhaps feel a bit better about themselves, regulate their emotions, or maybe get a grip on uncertainty. You know those sayings. Yeah, if I've had a beer at a party or a glass of wine, I'm a bit more relaxed and find it easier to engage in conversations with others. Group pressure also plays a big role, like cannabis and nicotine use in adolescence. Come on, just take a puff. At that age, it's especially important to belong, not to stand out, not to be a target of ridicule or isolation. Peers can be very persuasive, and the fear of missing out or being judged can be overwhelming. And so it might not be easy for teenagers to say no when they are trying to fit in. Of course, in adolescence, it's also about seeking new experiences. Sensation seeking, like altering consciousness in different ways through drug use. And my personal disposition plays a role. For example, if I have a desire to try skydiving or bungee jumping or other extreme sports, I'm probably looking for that sensation-seeking thrill. In addition to physical activities, this thrill-seeking behavior can manifest in various ways. Then I might also be more interested in expanding my consciousness through drug use. During this stage, social influences and peer pressure can also contribute significantly to the choices I make in my pursuit of new sensations. But that's just a side note. People consume drugs for various reasons: to regulate emotions, to feel better, to feel braver, or to wind down in the evening with a so-called after-work beer, or simply to celebrate an occasion like a birthday, a big wedding, passing exams. So, it's a very, very wide range of different reasons why people use drugs.
Speaking of after-work beers, we know in systemic counseling that language, that the words and terms I use have a very significant meaning, a very significant impact. And I noticed in recent years, people don't say after-work beer anymore. They say after-work drink. Oh, really? Yeah, let's go for an after-work drink. That definitely sounds a lot better than an after-work beer.
Yes, but in the end, the image we develop from it is ultimately the same. I reward myself for the work done and have an alcoholic drink with it. It doesn't even have to be beer. It could be wine or whatever suits my mood at the time. And then there are, of course, people who say, okay, alcohol doesn't bring me much, and then they would like to consume something else that just makes them feel good.
Since we were just talking about words and their impact, I might not have been entirely attentive until now. In a professional context, we tend to use the word dependency rather than addiction. Why is that distinction significant, do you think?
It has to do with the official terminology of the World Health Organization. So, until 1964, the term addiction was used. And after that, it was split into two parts: misuse and dependence, because it is simply less stigmatizing and easier to address clinically. Interestingly, it is still commonly referred to as addiction in everyday language. And if you try to find a counseling center now, you generally don't look for a dependency counseling center, but an addiction counseling center. This reflects how ingrained the term is in societal discussions around substance use. So, in everyday language, the term addiction is used, such as gambling addiction. Gambling dependency is also not as common in everyday language conversations. Therefore, people still frequently talk about gambling addiction instead.
Exactly. Or I just came from the addiction clinic. There are no dependency clinics, but there are addiction clinics.
Yes, they do exist nowadays as well. But if I'm looking for something, particularly the low threshold counseling centers, they are usually still called addiction counseling centers.
Because it has somehow become ingrained in the language.
Yes, exactly.
You've mentioned it a few times already. There are 3 distinct levels. We talk about enjoyment, then misuse, and then dependency. Could you briefly explain these 3 stages for better understanding?
So when we talk about enjoyment, it's really about being able to say, okay, I'm consuming this drug, regardless of which one, and I'm saying this completely without substance. I can stop at any time, and I'm not just telling myself that. For instance, I might enjoy a glass of wine or beer during a specific occasion, and I clearly separate work from leisure. And when it comes to misuse, it's often a blurry line from enjoyment to abuse because, let's say, the beer tastes so good or the wine is so excellent that I drink more than is good for me. This can certainly happen sometimes, and it might be physically rewarded with a hangover the next day. But if I do this frequently over a longer period of time, we're talking about abusive consumption, because although I know that more than 2 beers might not be a good idea, I still let others convince me to drink more. Then we're talking about abusive consumption. And with dependency, there are 6 criteria established by the WHO. The first sign is that I need it, experiencing a strong craving. The drug is always present, and people constantly think about this addictive substance, feeling like they want to consume it, or in cases of behavioral addiction, they want to play or be online on social media, whatever. So there's a very strong craving. That's the first sign. The second sign is that I can't stop. Often, for example, when we're talking about substance dependencies, I might not be able to stop after the second beer. It becomes clear that there's a problem here when others can stop after 2 beers and say it's enough. But I noticed that I could actually have a third and fourth one. And I end up doing so because I don't have control over leaving the beer, even if it's offered or placed in front of me. The third sign is that eventually I can't go without it. I might be able to, so to speak, be strong for 2 or 3 days, but then the urge builds up so much that I have to get something to drink or consume. Whether it's alcohol or something else, I just can't resist the craving anymore. Yes. So this is the so-called inability to remain abstinent. And the next point, the fourth sign, is that I noticed that to repeat the initial effects of feeling good when I consume, I need more, a so-called tolerance development. This tolerance means that I have to increase the dose to achieve the same effect, which also means that sometimes I start consuming at times when withdrawal symptoms occur, which is the fifth sign. These withdrawal symptoms can be quite distressing, and to alleviate them, I find myself consuming again. It's a vicious cycle that keeps looping back on itself. I feel like I'm just not myself anymore, losing touch with who I used to be. This becomes physically noticeable for the person. Sleep disorders, pain, shaking, and cramps can occur. These symptoms can be incredibly distressing and debilitating, making it difficult to carry out daily activities. As a result, to reduce these uncomfortable and painful sensations, consumption happens again. And the sixth characteristic is that it's not just all about consumption, but I also withdraw from social life to then be able to indulge my consumption. This withdrawal means I no longer pursue certain hobbies. I don't care about family and friends anymore, and I neglect sports, which was once a passion of mine. And then the last pillar is usually work, which is then neglected along with all other responsibilities. So those are the 6 criteria where you simply notice that something is wrong. I would like to add that the reason why dependency disorders often manifest late on a physical level is that the work pillar is often the last to fall. Typically, We maintain our professional lives as a way to preserve some semblance of normalcy. However, when it becomes apparent at work that I might have a problem with consuming drug XY, it's often the case that the other pillars which might have provided support and meaning to my life are already severely damaged or partly even completely gone.
If it stands out, you can do without it.
Assume that this is a long-standing problem which definitely cannot be solved overnight.
We're doing this podcast today, or this episode on this topic today, to give people support in engaging with the topic more closely, to take a closer look and see how it affects them personally, and to encourage deeper understanding. We also want to point out the risks involved. However, there are also quite intriguing approaches where interesting research is being done with drugs. And in Switzerland, there's something called microdosing that has been gaining popularity and attention.
Yes. So-called microdosing involves using very, very small doses of synthetic drugs, usually to treat severe depression and other mental health issues. For this, substances like LSD or ketamine are used, for example. But one must note, before everyone rushes off and thinks, oh, I'll just try this at home without proper guidance. These are scientifically supported studies where people are administered these drugs under supervision, really in, as the name suggests, microdoses. These are treatments for people who couldn't get help any other way, because other medications and therapeutic options had stopped working. Moreover, it is often a last resort for those who have exhausted all other avenues of treatment. These are scientifically accompanied studies conducted by researchers in Switzerland to understand to what extent drugs could be useful for something other than, in quotes, purely for recreational purposes. But this is not something we recommend as imitation for home, as it could be potentially dangerous without proper guidance. And in Germany, as far as I know, there haven't been any studies on this yet, making it a significant area for future research. I recently watched a documentary about people traveling to Switzerland to get treated, highlighting the lengths some individuals are willing to go for specialized care. But as mentioned, these are really patients who have the problem that conventional medications no longer work for them. And here too, it should be noted that there are people for whom this new treatment also doesn't work, just as medication works differently for different people. This is not a cure-all, but rather studies that are being conducted to show that these substances might also be useful for something else.
So it's very important not to do this at home, not to do it alone, but rather these are really scientific studies under clinical conditions with people who have otherwise been fully treated and for whom this might be a hope. And there is research and we think that's good. We support that wholeheartedly. And at the same time, it is important to know that if it happens, it can only be done in this context under close supervision. At the same time, you cannot prevent drug use entirely, even with strict regulations in place. And especially with the cannabis law, there is a bit of recognition of the need to rethink our approach to cannabis. And this has now been done with this legislative change. Additionally, there is also the possibility, if I then decide to take drugs, to take a close look at what kind of drugs these are or what quality these drugs have. To facilitate this, there are so-called testing centers in Berlin which aim to provide users with detailed information about the substances they intend to consume. This ensures that users are better informed and can make safer choices regarding their drug use. What do you think about that? I'm curious to hear your perspective on the matter and any additional insights.
I find it a good solution to say that if drugs are to be taken, people should have the opportunity to test them first. Especially with synthetic drugs. This originally comes from the techno scene, and it started in Berlin clubs at the end of the 90s. It's important to ensure safety, as these substances can often be harmful or even deadly if misused. There was often a section next to the cloakroom where drugs could be tested because the pill with the nice smiley face on it doesn't have a label saying, "Hello, I also contain rat poison." This allows the person who wants to consume the drug to go to these test centers or various clubs and say, "Could you please test this?" They can then make an informed decision based on the analysis received. This service significantly reduces the risks associated with recreational drug use and helps to prevent potential harm. Then, 1 hour later or so, they can see exactly what's in it, maybe some baking soda or something else, and can then decide based on this analysis whether to take the risk or not. This obviously provides a completely different basis for decision making for responsible consumption compared to just judging whether the guy selling it looks trustworthy.
That's definitely the safer option. Speaking of a trustworthy approach to drugs, what's the deal now? Am I allowed to smoke weed at work?
No, you shouldn't, because we usually have company agreements on addiction, where the term addiction often relates to substance consumption and abuse. You don't go to work drunk, and companies are increasingly updating their policies to clearly state that anything affecting your physical and mental performance is, of course, not allowed at the workplace. This includes alcohol, drugs, and even certain medications that might impair judgment. So someone driving a forklift shouldn't be high or drunk under any circumstances for safety reasons. Hence, it's not allowed. It's possible for someone to say, "Okay, I leave the work gate on Friday afternoon and light up a joint. But when I come back to work on Monday morning, I need to be clear-headed, just as I would if I went drinking beer on Friday night or partied on Saturday. I'd need to come to work sober on Monday morning." So the partial legalization of cannabis hasn't created a situation where you can say, "Okay, let's all get high together at work."
At work, and that's for a very good reason, because in many jobs where there's a lot of responsibility involved, it wouldn't be a good idea to work in that condition, whether under the influence of alcohol or other drugs.
Yes, that's exactly the point. So whether I'm sitting at my desk or operating machinery, it's about the companies having a duty of care to look after their employees' health. This responsibility ensures a safe and productive environment for everyone. And it's also about wanting to age healthily and being able to work healthily throughout our careers. We all want to retire with our well-being intact. And that's why drug use and work don't mix well.
You're setting me up perfectly for the next question. The topic is employer care. If someone has listened up to this point and feels the need to reflect more closely on their behavior, or if someone else has heard it and thinks of someone who might have an issue that requires closer attention, how does the addiction support system in Germany work? If I realize there's really an issue, what would be the first point of contact to address it?
Who should I turn to first? Well, internally, on our PME intranet pages, we have a lot of information about addiction and dependency and where to find counseling. This includes resources and support specifically tailored for the different target groups you've just mentioned. For a person who thinks they might be affected, we have links available to help them self-test. These links also ensure complete anonymity so you can check on your own. Am I affected? Additionally, we offer resources for people who may be worried about a colleague or friend and would like to take appropriate action. On the other hand, we support managers who think there's colleague X or Y, and maybe I should have a conversation with them. We assist with a so-called step-by-step plan, which is often included in company agreements on addiction, helping managers prepare for such employee discussions. We also support family members who might be affected or need guidance on how to deal with a loved one's addiction issues. Our comprehensive approach ensures that everyone involved gets the necessary tools and resources to handle these sensitive situations effectively and with empathy. Even if a family member thinks their partner drinks too much and it's really stressing them out, they can call us and we will determine together what additional support options are available, which I will get to next. We understand how difficult this situation can be and that having a supportive community makes a huge difference. There are also support groups specifically for family members, where people with a relative struggling with addiction can talk about their experiences and get advice from those who understand what they are going through. These groups can provide invaluable emotional support and practical tips on how to cope. We also have addiction counseling centers in every larger city, and we can help anyone who calls us looking for an addiction counseling center to find one near them. Our goal is to connect individuals and families with the resources they need to navigate this challenging time effectively and find a path toward healing. And the reason I specifically point out addiction counseling centers is that when it comes to getting long-term support, it makes sense to go to an addiction counseling center. They can help sort out costs with pension insurance or health insurance, making the entire process much less stressful. However, you can first get informal, low-threshold, anonymous advice either from us or at local addiction counseling centers to see what your options are.
Exactly. Unfortunately, it's still the case that not everyone can get advice from us because it always depends on whether the company is with us or not. We are happy to provide this information again in the show notes, where you can find addiction counseling centers so everyone can turn to them if they need advice. Additionally, we have included some resources for online support communities, which can be very helpful. Finally, I would like to give a brief overview of the topic of how such a treatment works, because perhaps for some it might be necessary to actually seek treatment to improve their quality of life. And I can imagine that there are a lot of uncertainties and maybe even fears about it. How does it work? Whose care will I entrust myself to? What happens to me? Maybe you could say a few words about that so people get an idea of how it generally works and what steps are involved. We can't cover everything in detail now, but let's give a rough overview to get everyone on the same page.
Yes, there are various options available for those seeking help. There's both so-called outpatient addiction treatment and inpatient addiction treatment. And the first point of contact, if I say I really want long-term therapeutic support, is of course an addiction counseling center and or a general practitioner who can provide the necessary guidance and referrals. There, you can also immediately check if there are any physical impairments that may already be present, which can be crucial for early intervention. And then, for instance, if there has been a long-standing issue, like with alcohol, the general practitioner would likely issue a referral to the nearest hospital for what's called detoxification, a process designed to safely manage withdrawal symptoms under medical supervision. This usually takes about a week, during which the person is admitted as an inpatient to ensure they receive comprehensive care and monitoring. The reason for detoxification is that if there is already a certain depth of dependency, the person cannot just stop drinking overnight without the risk of so-called seizures, which are really life-threatening. Many people who have been dealing with alcohol for a long time and then decide to quit cold turkey can put themselves at risk of developing seizures. This is truly a life-threatening situation, so an initial assessment is necessary. Without proper medical supervision, the risks are significantly higher, making it crucial for healthcare professionals to evaluate the individual's health status and determine the safest path to sobriety. Therefore, the first points of contact are indeed addiction counseling centers and or general practitioners, because they can make an informed judgment on whether detoxification is truly necessary before the actual addiction treatment begins in earnest.
Yes, although one must clearly say before anyone thinks, oh God, I can't stop drinking because I'll get life-threatening seizures, this is the reason for inpatient treatment, because it can be well treated in a safe clinical setting.
Exactly, that is exactly the point. It's good that you added that, because in some cases medications can be given to reduce the so-called craving or urge to use, thereby making it more bearable physically for the person. This allows alcohol to be gradually weaned from the body under medical supervision. Such an approach not only helps manage withdrawal symptoms, but also reduces the risk of relapse, providing a more supportive and controlled environment for recovery. As a result, individuals feel more comfortable and secure during the detoxification process, enhancing their chances of successful long-term sobriety. After about a week, the person is detoxified, but this is still a very vulnerable phase in their recovery journey. They need immediate aftercare because without it, the temptation to consume again can be incredibly strong. Without proper support and guidance, the likelihood of a relapse increases significantly. I've worked in detox myself, and if follow-up care isn't provided, the desire to drink doesn't just go away in a week, especially if someone has been consuming for years. The body and mind both need time to adjust and heal, and a solid support system can make all the difference during this critical period. This feeling of wanting to drink because it gives certain feelings or because it makes them feel a certain way still exists. That's why they need aftercare, which is usually facilitated by hospitals, social workers, etc., and connected to the nearest addiction counseling centers, like in the districts of Berlin. This ensures the person is not left alone with their struggle. This is extremely, extremely important.
There is a good concept and well thought out structure in place to help people who seriously want to tackle this problem effectively and efficiently.
Definitely, yes. So the point is just difficult because it always depends a bit on how long the person has been consuming, how much they have been consuming, and how well they are embedded in their social environment, And the better the person is embedded in a supportive community, the more they feel supported, and the higher the probability that they can actually stop consuming, But the point is that we still have this persistent idea that it's always just a matter of willpower, But in that critical moment, it's not really just about willpower, especially with addictions like alcohol. It's about having the right circumstances and help. You have to learn to cope with mental pressure. This need that I have, which I have nurtured over the years, when I feel bad, I drink something or consume something else that needs to stop. It's not just a physical habit, but a deeply ingrained mental one as well. So when I talk to former smokers, they say the worst part is truly the mental addiction. In this situation, I sit on the balcony and feel the need to smoke, even though I haven't smoked for 15 years, because it's so closely linked with these specific situations. So it's never too late to stop drinking. While I don't have any specific numbers at hand to tell you exactly how successful it is, many people do manage to succeed in overcoming their addiction. However, it's important to note that there are always individual cases where detox and therapy have a kind of revolving door effect. These are often people who do not have good social support, and where perhaps a lot has already fallen apart beforehand. So, keywords, those foundations we spoke about earlier.
That was a nice closing remark. Dear Mandy, thank you for your time and the great and deep knowledge you shared with us. And of course, we are always happy to receive feedback from you about the podcast. Your insights are truly valuable and greatly appreciated. I thank you for listening and wish you a wonderful day, evening, or morning, depending on when you listen to this episode. Please stay tuned for more exciting content in our future episodes.
Thank you, Ollie.